Karl, it's great to meet you. Thanks for coming on Talking Heads.
Oh, thank you. It's an honour. Thank you.
What's it like being a man who's best known perhaps for the loudness of his shirts?
Our family's been in showbiz for a couple of centuries, and this is called stage clothing. And early on, I was introduced to the concept of stage clothing and even the stage autograph. So you have a special autograph, which is not the same as your credit card autograph.
So it's a definition.
Well, yeah, look, I like wearing bright clothing. Why should women have all the fun and get to wear the bright clothing? Like, there's this thing where you've got to match up all the colours at one end of the spectrum. Forget that. I'm into the rainbow theory of colour dressing. You wear every colour at once.
What so drives your curiosity?
Oh, I remember when I was reading this book, I think it was by Plato, years ago. I couldn't get through it. You know, it was much too hard for me. But there was one sentence that said, the unexplored life is not worth living. I thought, wow, gosh, you know, like each time a second goes past, you'll never get that second back again. And so I thought, every second I'm there, I've got to look at what's happening. Like, you know, you got videotapes, but they're in a yellow box. I've never seen a yellow box before. What's that? Well, there's a guy welding, but he's using a different sort of torch. Why? You know, and just to explore every aspect of life.
When did you become conscious of that?
The first moment of consciousness was reading a book on astronomy. And I thought, wow, isn't the Earth big? The solar system big? The galaxy big? Oh, my heavens, there's other galaxies. Oh, we'll never get to the end of it. And that's when I was about 7 or 8, and I suddenly had this immense feeling of awe and wonder, and it's never gone.
Well, let's see where life began for the future Dr. Karl.
I'm the firstborn in the Polish family. My full name is Karl Sven Wojtek Saskonkowicz Maciek Kruszelnicki. Having that many names and being a WOG in the early 50s was difficult in Australia, especially when you grew up in a Catholic Irish background. My parents loved me, but they had secrets that they wouldn't tell me about. And my father would later on let on that he'd been in a German concentration camp. Now, my very first memory in Australia is growing up in a refugee camp in Bonegilla, which is near Albury on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And the three of us, my parents and I, lived in this tiny, tiny apartment, roughly the size of a station wagon car. And my very first memory is eating an egg. And only later did I find out that the three of us got one egg per week, and my parents would make the sacrifice and would give me, the growing child, that egg. Aren't parents wonderful? I started reading when I was about 7 or 8, and then I started devouring all the books in the Wollongong Library. And by the time I was about 12 to 14, I started on my quest of reading one science fiction book a day. I was just drifting along, as Norman Gunston says, like a paddle pop stick in the gutter of life on a rainy day. And I did physics and maths because everybody did that. And I went to Wollongong University because it was nearby. And I did science because that's what I did. And I just drifted through doing science. And I just did not quite fit in with anybody else. But I had a few friends. I loved the intellectual freedom. The hippie phase lasted for about 5, 6, 7 years, and during that phase, I really opened myself up to all sorts of things. 72 or 74 or something like that, I saw this advertisement in the paper, become a filmmaker. I thought, hey, I could be a filmmaker. And so I applied and I got one of the first grants and ended up making one of the first music videos in Australia. And I thought, I'm not ever going to make any money out of this music TV stuff. It's probably not going to take off. So I became a taxi driver, drove 250,000 kilometres, labourer, car mechanic. I thought it was ridiculous. Here I am. I've got a degree in physics. I know how the universe began. I can't fix up a handbrake on a car. And so I taught myself to become a car mechanic and became apprenticed and then repaired cars for money and did all sorts of different jobs just to try and experience life.
Karl, a crucial factor in your family coming to Australia was you catching a fever.
Well, we were all set to go to the USA on a ship in Sweden, on the dock, ready to go. You know, 5 years after the end of the Second World War, refugees shuttled all over the world. I get a reaction to the vaccine, and by the way, I love vaccines, get a reaction to the vaccine, and the family thinks, we go, play it safe, sit there,
Ship sails away. There we are on the dock with all of our luggage. Cross out USA, put in Australia, because that's where the next ship is going. The next ship that pulls up to the dock is going to Australia, and that's why we end up in Australia, not the USA.
Now, this is post the war.
Post the war.
Where Sweden was safe, really.
Sweden was very safe, but Russia was making noises about Finland, Cold War, hydrogen bombs exploding. It was my father had already been in a couple of concentration camps, didn't want to go into another Russian concentration camp.
Both your father and mother had good reasons to feel insecurity, that they'd known a lot of insecurity in their lives.
They'd been in a position where other people controlled their lives, and they were both in situations where they should have died except accidents. My mother, they ran out of Zyklon B at Auschwitz. My father was going to be killed because he was the one who was carrying the dead bodies to put them into the gas ovens. He was going to be killed. And he managed to use a tin of sardines as a bribe to swap identities with somebody who was officially dead.
When did you find that out?
Only late. My father was reluctant, but he would tell me some things. He had this big number on his arm, 95808. That was his tattoo number, big ugly thing. I never found out that my mother was in the concentration camps until she was beginning to dement.
Well, these had obviously been just huge formative experiences in their lives, and yet they withheld them from you.
Because they didn't want me to be bitter and twisted and grow up with hate. And they were pretty good at not having hate. There was one case of my father who ran into one of the guards at his concentration camp in Wollongong. And my father was involved as a very low-level bureaucrat on the water board, helping employ people, and he gave him a job. And later he said to the guy, "You were my guard at the concentration camp." And he'd done bad things to my father. He said, "Well, why'd you give me a job?" He said, "It's not for you. I don't mind, I forgive you, but it's for your children."
Well, by not divulging these things to you till quite late, of course, protects you in one sense, but it also, family secrets have got their negative side too.
Yes, and the bad side was I did not really understand why they were how they were. I didn't understand why they had this distrust of people. They were still nice and friendly, but there was always a little bit of paranoia.
You go from Sweden to Wollongong. That's a big distance in not only physical distance, but also in cultural, psychological distance
and
too,
the delis,
in the 1950s.
My father my parents would not really forgive Australians, the Anglo-type Australians, the bad delis. Like Devon. What is Devon?
What is Devon?
What is Devon?
What is it?
I don't know. It's some sort of processed meat. But, there's a cabanossi and there's a real sausage.
It goes with tomato sauce,
But
actually.
luckily a few other expatriates came over, and that was the beginning of bringing other sorts of foods into Australia, part of the multiculturalism thing.
Did you fit in?
Not really. I was too geeky, and I still do, would wear sandals with socks. And there are good arguments for that because you have the protection and you don't sweat. But that sort of separated me from my fellow schoolmates. And the other thing was that I was a WOG and they were all Anglos. And there was just this big gap.
There was a moment when you were shopping with your parents, when you were speaking some language which wasn't Polish, was it?
Well, we could speak a bunch of languages. My father could speak 12 languages. My mother could speak 8. And we had this sort of happy gibberish of mixing Polish and Swedish and Danish and German and Russian. And we were in a shoe shop in the main street of Wollongong. I know exactly where it is, but it's not there anymore. And there was a family from our school. And the parents whispered something to their child and pushed him forward. And he spoke up and he said, "Shut up, you wogs, speak English." And from that moment forward, I never spoke anything except English in a desperate attempt to be liked by my fellow classmates, not that it made any difference at all.
But Wollongong was also a very migrant town too.
But the wogs knew where to go. They were all pushed out of town, and back in those days, where the streets did not have bitumen on them. We were the only ones who were living in streets with bitumen on them. So we were sort of living above our class, as it were. And I remember one day, nobody had cars except for one wealthy family, and they organised on our street a little carpool. They'd pick up all the kids and take them to school and back every day. It was only 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres, nothing, except me. And every day I'd walk past and I was 8 years old, and all I knew was that they weren't giving me a lift, and there was room. I mean, nobody had seatbelts. There was lots of room in the car for me, but they wouldn't give me a lift. Every day, backwards and forwards for the whole month, they wouldn't give me a lift.
How did that shape the sort of person you became?
Luckily, I didn't become bitter and twisted. I don't know how, but I've developed this philosophy that most people are not malevolent, they're just ignorant. They just have not walked in your shoes. And all you've got to do is give them the chance and they'll be understanding. And I guess it pushed me that way. But irrationally, I'm an optimist. My father was an optimist. You know, somebody dumps a ton of manure on my front lawn, I don't think, oh, what's this crap? I think, gee, the rose will grow really well this year.
You soon climbed into a taxi, not as a passenger, but as a driver.
Well, on one hand, I loved it to pieces because I was a bit shy, you know, growing up the Wog and Wollongong. And suddenly here I am driving around at night, so I don't have to make eye contact, facing forward, so I don't have to make eye contact, and they're coming into my lounge. So, you guys been going out long? You married? Why not? And you're asking really outrageous questions like that, and they'd say, well, I don't know why we're not married. Yeah, why aren't you married? Why? But on the other hand, it was a little bit scary. A few of my friends got killed.
As
driving,
taxi drivers?
As taxi drivers.
Well, for you, there was life after taxi driving. Let's see what happened.
Well, after taxi driving, I firstly drifted off into doing a little bit of non-degree science at university. And blow me down, I got reasonable marks. And then I went on a holiday with my parents and I taught myself to swim. I went and got lessons on how to swim and then practiced up and down this beach in New Caledonia. And one day I had this terrible cramp from swimming a kilometre, which I'd never done before. And while I'm lying on my bed in agony, I thought, I'm going to university, I'm doing non-degree subjects, why don't I get a degree? And I had no idea about this thing called the human body. As far as I knew, it was just this sort of slush inside. And I was just astonished by this universe inside the body. And so the next step when I finished my master's degree in biomedical engineering was either do a PhD or do medicine. And I decided to do medicine purely because I could get a more hands-on thing and I was feeling more comfortable with people, less shy with people. I wanted to be able to help liberate them. I ended up in a university almost by accident. A fax request out of the fax machine saying, hi, this is the University of Sydney. Do you know anybody who wants to apply for the Julius Sumner Miller Fellowship? Could you recommend anybody? And I thought, oh, Julius Sumner Miller, he's a heavy dude. But no, I don't know anybody. And about a week later, I got, do you want to apply for this job or not? And so I applied for it, and there were a whole bunch of people, and I got the position. I never thought I'd end up inside a university, which some people regard as a rest home for slightly dysfunctional people, but I have ended up here, and it is because they value learning. They value skills. And so there are some people who, quite frankly, don't have any personal skills, and if you met them in a pub, you'd want to punch them, but boy, can they give something to society in terms of their knowledge. The way I got into TV was, my book publisher sent a book out to ABC TV. They rang me up and said, hey, we're starting up a new TV science show on the ABC. Do you want to come along and be interviewed? And I said, yes, went along. And then I went back to my fellow fourth-year medical students and said, hey, I've been offered this job, $40,000 a year, travel around the world and talk about science and be on TV every week. And I said, no. And they said, you're crazy. So I dropped out of fourth-year uni and took up the job and helped start up Quantum.
We'll attempt to answer vexing questions like...
What did you want to be when you grew up?
My first memory is wanting to be a nuclear physicist because it just seemed so exciting. And then...
What age were you?
13 or 14. Like, the dream was that you get a little bit of uranium like this, you put it in a little lead box, and it gives you the electricity to run your house and your car for 50 years, and at the end of the time it turns 100% into lead and you beat it flat and use it on your guttering. Of course, it didn't turn out like that at all.
Well, that's one use of nuclear physics. What about the idea of making bombs?
That bothered me, but not very much, but my social conscience was late in coming.
One of the things you did as a young child was to immerse yourself in reading.
Oh, look, from when I was 14, 13 to when I was 32, I read one book, a complete hardcover book, every day. And then I started doing mostly science fiction, because it's fairly easy to read, so it doesn't count as real literature. And then when I was 32, I started studying medicine. And the body of knowledge needed was so huge, I just had to give up my habit.
How did you weigh up doing good as a children's doctor versus the idea of being a communicator on shows like Quantum?
Being a kid's doctor, in terms of satisfaction, was the best job I ever had in my life, but I can do more good for the community by going into the media. As a doctor in a kids' hospital, one family at a time. In the media, thousands, tens of thousands of people.
But partly it's also got to be about opportunity, what comes along, what interests you, what attracts you next, isn't it?
Well, the media does have the aspect of being bright and shiny, and I do have a short attention span.
What did you want to communicate about?
At the time I didn't know, but now I realise that I'm trying to fight the forces of evil and darkness who say things are bad and if you sacrifice a goat, it will get better. Or if you hate somebody. What I'm trying to do is bring little islands of sanity. And somebody gave me some very good advice in the early days. They said, keep away from opinions. Everybody's got opinions, they're not worth anything. Keep away from opinions and stick to the facts.
Well, I've been with Triple J, even Double J for yonks. It all began when I applied to go on a space shuttle because I thought, I've got a degree in science, I've got a degree in engineering, soon I'll have a degree in medicine and surgery, I'd be useful on a space shuttle. So I sent a letter saying, Dear NASA, I want to get in on a space shuttle. Yours truly, Karl. They sent me a letter back saying, sorry, we're all full up and we wouldn't employ you anyway because you're not American. Yours truly, NASA. And then Triple J, as part of the year of transport, was running something on the launch of the space shuttle. And so I rang them and said, look, I know a bit about the space shuttle. Can I talk about it? And they said, OK. And it just never stopped. And I've just been Triple J ever since.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, how you going?
Good, thanks. What's your question for Dr. Karl?
Yeah, I just experimented. It first happened out in my shed.
But what are some of the weirder things that have been thrown at you by way of questions?
Somebody rang in and said, why is belly button fluff blue and why do you get it? And I said, I have no idea. I'll go looking. And I finally found an article in The Lancet which said that in the same way that all roads lead to Rome, all hair on your belly leads to your belly button. And so any fluff, whatever that is, that happens to be there, heads towards your belly button and falls into the hole like a Jabba the Hutt, bring the belly button fluff to me. It comes in and never goes out again. But it didn't quite make sense. And then a guy rang in and he said, I've got a hairy belly and I shaved a 10-centimetre circle around my belly button. And that stopped the production of belly button lint. We then asked people to send us samples of belly button fluff from around Australia, and we found, when we looked at it under an electron microscope, that belly button fluff is made up of fibres of clothing, mostly, a few fibres of hair held together by sticky dead skin cells. And for that, I won the Ig Nobel Prize given to me by Harvard University, and they showed me so much respect that they flew me to Harvard at my own expense.
The Ig Nobel... At your own expense. The Ig Nobel Prize. You better explain. Tell us more about that.
There's a Nobel Prize, which everybody knows about. The Ig Nobel Prize is sort of comedy science given for research that cannot or should not be done. But on the other hand, it makes you laugh and then it makes you think.
How does your mind work? How does it turn these things over? Does it think like a scientist?
No, it thinks like what would entertain the person at the pub. And so I read through huge bodies of literature every year, and I'll come across something weird and say, that's really weird. That'd make a great story. Like, the first computer is 2,200 years old, made by the Greeks, out of 37 brass discs, and it can predict the movements of the tides in the Mediterranean and the movements of the planets. And we completely lost the technology, and then we got it again later. Weird stuff like that.
Let's have a look at what's happening in your life right now.
Back in the early 70s in Sydney, I was a hippie filmmaker and fabulously poor. So the way I survived was by going to the Chinese markets and buying lots of brown rice and soybeans and getting all these vegetables for free. Nowadays, I buy the vegetables and this is what you need for a family of 6 when 2 of them are teenagers and eat like horses.
The life cycle of a fish in pictures.
What are those?
Look, I guess I am really passionate about science, as are my fellow colleagues in talking about science. And I think it's because science gives you a little bit of sanity. It tells you something that's fairly close to being absolute, total and undeniable truth, rather than opinions. And from that truth, you can then make opinions, rather than going the other way round. We've been together for a couple of decades and have 3 children. I proposed by phone from the Himalayas, and Mary said, why do you want to get married now? Why didn't you marry me when I was pregnant and barefoot? And I said, I don't know, I just want to get married. I don't know. She said, you have to give me a better reason than that, and eventually I did.
Karl, why did it take you all these years to make an honest woman of Mary?
I wanted to get married. because of bad things that happened in the Himalayas where one of our party almost died. And so I thought, gee, life is really fragile. Why haven't I got married? I'm a fool. And so ended up getting married, taking the kids, taking the grandparents. So 3 generations of us get in the planes, fly for 36 hours, go deep into the Arctic Circle on the longest day of the year. So in the same way that the sun doesn't set in the Arctic Circle, so too will our love never set on our marriage. A scientific metaphor. See, marrying science and love together.
What sweet symbolism.
It is nice. And then it's really weird, the midnight sun. Like, at midnight, the sun is this high above the horizon.
What happened in the Himalayas to make you think that maybe getting married wasn't a bad idea?
On a school group with my son at Sydney Boys High, we're travelling through the Himalayas and one of the party gets sick and almost dies. And I've got to both reduce her pain and get her to the only MRI unit, imaging unit, in the entire Himalayas. And we just got her through, and she didn't die, epidural abscess, just got her through, and she's okay. And I was thinking, my God, just like that, you can die. And I love Mary, I love my family, and why haven't I married them? And it was more chance to do that and have a party and go and see the midnight sun as well.
Well, after all these years, have you got better at relationships?
I'm learning, I'm evolving. Unfortunately, I'm not a woman. Women are really good at it. Guys have to learn. And I think I'll keep on learning for a while.
You know, why the difference?
I don't know. It's to do with the human brain. And let me tell you, I'd rather deal with how the universe began than most things to do with the human brain, because the human brain is really complicated.
What about your own story, though, in terms of relationships? What were you like? What did you need to evolve from?
Not talking and not listening, which is sort of a guy thing.
But you talk all the time.
Yeah, but not talk about things, not ideas, not concepts, not feelings. They're the important things.
So what might you say now that you might not have said a few decades ago?
So how do you feel about that, leaning forward with a sympathetic look on my face and then keep your mouth shut for the next minute or so while it all comes out? And that's an important thing to learn, how to do.
Dr. Karl is attempting a world-first rocket book launch.
He joins us now from Bondi Beach in Sydney. Dr. Karl, good morning to you. Now, tell us about this world-first experiment.
Well, normally book launch is you stand around, you have a bit of cheese.
This is my 25th book, and people say things like, I've been reading your books and I've decided to go and become a carpenter, or finish off my high school studies, or do a PhD, or become a nurse. And I don't know what it is about my radio programs or my books that inspire people to use their brain, but hey, bring it on. I'm really happy that I can help liberate people from what holds them back.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Dr. Karl could launch his book like that, couldn't he?
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, how do you want to change the world then? Because you do have opinions. Around some public health issues, for example, you're quite strong.
Well, vaccination, it's quite obvious that no vaccine is perfect, but taking vaccines is way, 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 way better than not taking vaccines.
Driving behaviour is another area that you've actually put your name to.
Driving is really dangerous. It's possibly one of the more dangerous things you can do in our society, except for maybe smoking cigarettes. 1/5 of all road deaths are associated with somebody just falling asleep at the wheel.
Well, you have a real interest in driving, don't you? You test drive cars.
I test drive four-wheel drives and have been through 10 of the 12 deserts in Australia. I love four-wheel drives out of town. Hate them in town because they're so high. And one person has good vision and 20 people suffer.
What then is nirvana for you? Is it being in a four-wheel drive?
Four-wheel driving is lovely because we have such a good family time and the life is lovely. You have an early dinner and then as the sun sets, you wash up and you lay down the ground sheet. You lie on the ground sheet, all of us, with our heads pointing towards the centre and the little laser pointers. And then you watch. There's a satellite and you point towards the satellite. So in the first hour after sunset, you see the satellites. The second hour after sunset, you watch for the meteors. When we've seen about 20 meteors, we go to bed. It's a good life and we're there together and we're talking and we're not being force-fed music or television or radio, although television is a fine thing, especially if it's government television. And we're just being a family. I love it.
Enjoy the good life. It's been great talking to you, Karl. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
And that's Talking Heads for this week. We'll be back with another program at the same time next week. In the meantime, if you want to visit our website, we're at abc.net.au/talkingheads, I'll see you again soon.